The tape recordings you are about to hear were recorded in undisclosed locations more than 20 years ago. They were made on an old microcassette recorder and have never been played publicly before. Some of the things that are said may be both difficult to understand due to the quality of the tapes and troubling to hear due to content. Listener discretion is advised. It's 1996. Dave Rupert and his wife, Maureen, have been running a pub called the Drowes Inn in Tullaghan on the west coast of Ireland. It's a place where locals and holidaymakers, many of them Irish Republicans, come to enjoy some conversation and a drink.
One day there was a fight, and the fight was between Black Peter, the guy who died, and this other guy. We got him off Black Peter and got Black Peter calmed down and got him going up the road. And then the guy started in with me. We were going out the front door, and he's backing up. And all I'm trying to do is just get him at the door like this. He trips over the thing going backwards. So he falls backwards, and he grabs a hold of me. And I tripped over going ahead, and I'm going down on top of him. I'm going to kill him. Oh, yeah. And on concrete. So I twist sideways and go down on my knees. Shit, I was lame the rest of the summer. So I get on top of him, and he's fighting like crazy. And I get his neck right to the ground just like that. And I said, calm down. I said, calm down, I'll let you up, but I'm not going to let you up to calm down, you know. And so next thing I know, next day he's in the hospital because he got a concussion or something when he fell on the concrete. And everybody, all the neighbors and everybody are out in the street watching this, you know. I got the big Americans beating up yeah.
The pub came with so many characters. There was Mary, who'd ask for a quiet Powers, meaning pour her a Powers whiskey and don't tell anybody. There was James, the retired IRA bomb maker, whose mouth bore the scars of a beating that British officers gave him with a rifle butt. James would get drunk and refuse to leave, and would tell Dave, "Give me a drink or I'll blow this place up." Dave would tell him, "James, the walls are 2 feet thick. You better make it a good one." Sometimes the police or relatives would take Dave's heaviest drinkers to dry out at St. Columba's Hospital in Sligo. At one point, 5 of Dave's best customers were in the dry out, and the bar only had 6 stools.
What did they say? When did the one guy say you got 6 stools here?
Yeah, you got more characters here than you got stools or something like that.
Now, most of these characters in Dave's bar are hardcore Republicans, either local or from the north. Here's journalist Sean O'Driscoll, who wrote a book on Dave called The Accidental Spy.
Maureen Rupert said, she never saw drinking like she saw in that bar. Guys who all day just on a bar stool until they either fell over or somebody dragged them into a taxi and sent them home. And I think they all really liked the fact that David would put them in his own car, drive them home, you know. It's just an extraordinary moment where he found this drink called Pernod. You know, it's green in color and it was out of date. So he put it on as £1, 1 shot of Pernod to get rid of it. So the guys who were there on the bar all day were knocking back this Pernod. And just his description of going into the bathroom, it's just green vomit, pouring the bathroom in there. And Maureen calling him in a panic as one of them fell over one day. And she said, I think he's dead. And then the guy just got up behind her and was staggering there behind her when she thought he was dead. And there was just all that kind of stuff that was just going on. You know, these guys who weren't Republicans at all, they were just kind of small town, rural types who were waiting for the bar to open in the morning and were there until closing time and beyond. And I thought that was fascinating the way David dealt with all of that, you know, getting into fights with them or the ones who wouldn't pay for their trips at the back. And he would strip the aluminium off their trailer and all the kind of stuff that was just kind of small town bar owner, you know, with some very tough customers.
Dave is there to keep tabs on potential IRA activity, report anything suspicious, and hopefully make a little money. It started as the ideal cover for Dave, but the Drowes Inn was turning into a financial disaster.
I don't recall being told this, but Ed's take on the deal was that he told me that when I left, I was no longer working for the FBI. Well, we wouldn't have left if we known that. That we were working for the Irish.
Dave says the FBI had given him seed money to start the bar and left him to his own devices when it came to the business side of things. Sure, they'd love some info, but they apparently weren't going to offer any more money for it. Dave and Maureen had co-invested in the bar with the FBI and were now on their own.
The Drowes Inn was, of course, something of a mirage, which is a funny term in Chicago because it has its own meaning, right, Abden?
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. This is a bar that's not really a bar. You can buy drinks there, and it functions as a regular bar, but that's not really the purpose. It's been set up for another purpose, so it's kind of a mirage.
Right. The Mirage was a bar in Chicago, which our listeners may not know, that was purchased by your old employer, my current employer, the Chicago Sun-Times, along with a nonprofit watchdog group, and staffed undercover by reporters back in, I think, the 70s, right? It was basically a sort of a honey trap for bribe-asking inspectors, and it turned into a huge series of stories that got people indicted and fired.
Folks in Chicago, our age and older, remember the Mirage. It is a textbook case of investigative journalism. They'd heard all these stories about all these city inspectors shaking down business owners for bribes. What's the best way to do it? Let's open our own bar. So you've got the Sun-Times and the Better Government Association, where both of us have worked for both these places. And they send investigative reporters in there to be the bartenders. You got Pam Zeckman, you got Zay Smith, Bill Rechtenwald, and they're the bartenders. You got a couple of photographers, and they station the photographers in the air vent above the bar, so they get a view through the grate of the inspectors coming in with their hands out looking for bribes. And the air vents, every time they move, it goes boom, boom, and the inspectors look up there and say, "What the hell is that?" And the bartender chef say, "Oh, these vents are so noisy, the old vents."
Yeah, basically up in the rafters. And this is obviously surreptitious and very creative, and got a lot of action from it and results from it. And there were reforms to the inspection process, fire inspectors, building inspectors, zoning inspectors, things like that. But it was a remarkable investigation. And that came to mind, obviously, when we started talking about the Drowes Inn being something of a mirage, and like earlier in Chicago.
And so this was the seminal case of investigative reporting, and yet it did not win the Pulitzer Prize, precisely because stuffed shirts like Ben Bradley at the Washington Post were offended at this unorthodox approach to journalism and helped kind of quash it. Even though right now, in your journalism, investigative journalism textbook, this would be held up as one of a very innovative approach, which, as you say, it worked. Rupert's problematic running of the Drowes Inn, for all its goofiness, it actually kind of worked. It established him, helped him make contacts in the Republican community that helped him get on his way to moving up the ranks there. I'm Abden Palish.
I'm Bob Hergeth.
In partnership with Entropy Media.
This is Underbelly, the rebel kind.
Now, the British, as we know, have ratchet and fled from very many parts of the world.
Because they were untraceable barrels, Joe O'Neill saw them as the perfect casing for bombs.
McCluskey was sure that I was a planner. They all had it in their head that I was an Irish cop.
Because the British Army doesn't understand the local contours of Northern Ireland, all the different neighborhoods, which groups were whom.
It was clear discrimination. The result, an explosion of violence. Hundreds of people killed in a single year.
After the FBI helps Dave lease a pub in Ireland, FBI agent Ed Buckley, who doubles as a bomb tech, is called away to work on the Olympic Park bombing, thousands of miles away in Atlanta.
So I get over there, and a few weeks go by, a month goes by, but nobody shows up. But of course, I have no contract, and I'm just more like a real rookie at dealing with these grafters.
Dave learns the Garda, Ireland's national police force, is now handling his case, and he's called to meet with his new handler, Dermot Jennings. Now, neither the FBI nor the Brits entirely trust the Garda with intelligence about their moles. Dave even once described the Garda as Swiss cheese. So the FBI only tells Jennings, the Garda's detective superintendent in charge of terrorism, about Dave's true role. The local Garda don't know that Dave is a mole, but Jennings, higher up in the ranks, is aware and overseeing Dave's case, for better or worse.
He's now assistant commissioner. So I get on to meet with him, and first of all, he's late. And I'm picturing like a motorhome with black windows. And I mean, these people knew me, you know. I thought this fucking bread truck. One of these red things with the higher, you know what I mean? They're like a small front and it's got a higher back on it. They look like bread trucks.
Dave says Jennings shows up to the meeting in what looks like a bread truck. Dave says Jennings has the windows rolled down and has his arm out waving at him. He must have stuck out like a sore thumb, maybe even as much as a nearly 7-foot-tall American in rural Ireland.
Here's his big arm. Hi, Dave. Like, what's up? And he was like, so, they moved the front part operations first, you know. So we go over and says, yeah, climb in the back here. So he's got 2 chairs in the back of his van. That's what.
Dave says he climbs into the back of the van where Jennings has 2 chairs set up. When Dave gets in, he's ready to talk bread.
What about money here, you know? That's telling me to talk to you about money. Oh, he said, we don't have it's not our policy to pay anybody. He said, but if you want a little mileage come down here, so fucking 25 miles, how much money? 50 miles, how much money are you going to give me? I was looking for $5,000 or something, at least. And no, we don't do that.
Sitting in a plastic chair in the back of a van, Dave is told that he's no longer getting paid for his work. It's Garda policy not to pay informants, except maybe a little gas money. And on top of that, Dave says he can tell that Dermot Jennings doesn't really trust him.
I know at one time he said my information was about running out because I was a drunk. What if you're only Phil Buckley's shoes and Dermot's shoes and we're in trouble over this? Well, let's make the other guy look bad. And to say somebody's a drunk in Ireland, let's real common for somebody in my position to have been a drunk.
Dave suspects Jennings is preparing to throw him under the bus in case this operation implodes. He said at one point Jennings claimed Dave's information was unreliable because he was a drunk. Dave doesn't drink. Remember the joke about Buckley's business card hurting his stomach? Dave largely gave up drinking due to stomach troubles. At this point, the Garda apparently have no interest in spending cash to keep either the Drowes Inn open or Dave's operation afloat. In fact, if Dave ever thought the life of an international spy was going to be glamorous, he was in for a very Irish wake-up call. Despite being on his own, Dave had constructed a convincing cover, ingratiating himself to the locals. But there was one regular at Dave's bar who suspected from the beginning that Dave was a spy.
Philip McCluskey, who was the guy who did the machines, like in the bar, you know, the poker machines and stuff like that. He was one of the Tucson Six, you know, Tucson Six deal. Tucson Six was they were getting something called the Army depots.
Philip McCluskey was charged in a federal gun running case. McCluskey and the others were accused of trying to ship weapons to the IRA from New York and Florida. The charges were brought in Tucson, Arizona, where prosecutors hoped jurors would be less sympathetic to the IRA than in New York. McCluskey had fled home to Ireland and was living on the lam.
There was some guy in New York, and I don't remember his name, that was kind of like Get Buckley of New York. And he kept mentioning his name because McCluskey was sure that I was a planner. You know, he would hear in the air, and he always was sure. Yeah, because he even said, because he kept mentioning this lady, I said, I don't know who he is.
McCluskey kept mentioning the name of a New York law enforcement officer, just to see if Dave knew him and would react.
I know that he brought in a couple of guys from Monaghan one time that were supposedly provisional guys, and I think he brought them in to see if they knew who I was, you know, but nobody knew who I was. I mean, you know, like they recognized me from New York or something, you know, because they all had in their head that I was an Irish cop, and, you know, from New York because of my size and, you know, like not an Irish cop, but weren't you a cop?
As we've learned so far, the world of Irish republicanism was extremely paranoid of outsiders and infiltrators, and for good reason. McCluskey even brought in some guys from the Provisional IRA, the main branch of the IRA known as the Provost, to see if they recognized Dave as a cop. But Dave had his ways of keeping cool under scrutiny.
I've always been a big believer in, so to speak, transmitting thought. I don't know what the mechanics are to it, how it works, but that it happens. Whether it be sensing somebody's physical characteristics or whatever, I was always very into what I was doing, you know, like thinking what they were thinking.
As Dave spends more and more time with his IRA associates, he's learning more and more about the Irish struggle. He wants to get into the Irish Republican mindset to better blend in. He's been undercover, so to speak, for 2 years, and understanding the conflict he was getting into was so important to his spy work because, as he said, you had to live it.
Even though he was there to disrupt the Irish Republican Army, Dave doesn't necessarily disagree with the Republican philosophy that the Brits shouldn't be in Northern Ireland.
I wouldn't necessarily not agree that maybe the Brits are wrong for being there, but the alternative, I would have swore up and down that I could never figure out why they wouldn't leave. It started out with trying to colonize Ireland, and now you've got province there with over 50% of the people that including the British, and the other percentage don't. And if you pull out, there'd be a fucking slaughter. I mean, there'd be a civil war there.
Dave describes a powder keg ready to ignite if the British Army suddenly packed up and left and the border between North and South suddenly evaporated. Dave says Republican and Loyalist militant groups wouldn't be ready to make peace, to say the least. To understand what Dave is navigating while trying to get in deeper with militant Republicans, you have to understand where the Republican struggle started. And so does Dave. While he's struggling to run a bar, he's immersing himself in the world of Irish republicanism and the politics of the North. It's important for him to learn the history and the ins and outs of the conflict because details matter. And as Dave gets deeper and deeper in the weeds, it helps him get deeper into the militant organizations. In fact, if you listen to a few minutes of our taped conversations with Dave, you can hear just how detailed his knowledge really is. If you don't understand the nuances in the history, some of Dave's statements on tape might not make any sense to you.
Well, the schism, there was two, actually. The first schism with O'Neill was in 86. It actually started in 84 and finished in 86. First thing that happened was I think that Gerry Adams got elected as so that the control of Sinn Féin went from the south to Belfast. As he was referred to the ghetto mullah.
Before, he had been an American tourist, but now he was living in the middle of it. When the British Empire was at its most powerful, waves of Anglo-Europeans were planted around the world via British colonies. In Australia, in North America, in South Africa, as a way for the British to crowd out natives and gain a foothold in the lands they wanted to claim. It's a method they kind of previewed in Ireland. Professor Tim White.
My name is Professor Tim White. I teach at Xavier University in Cincinnati. I'm a professor of political science, and my specialty is Irish politics.
Over the centuries, like many other British colonies, the Irish people became more and more fed up and wanted the Brits out.
And as they strove to achieve this independence, mostly in the 19th century, but early efforts in the 20th century, the British became defensive, not just of the Irish move for independence, but a global effort.
The Irish Revolution began with the Easter Rising in 1916, which was commemorated by a folk song you might know called the Foggy Dew. In April 1916, Easter week, Irish Republicans launched an insurrection against the British. The rising lasted for just 6 days until the volunteer force was brutally defeated and its leaders were hastily executed. The nature of the defeat and the brutality of the executions turned Irish sentiment in the movement's favor, and the Easter Proclamation signed by the volunteers became a symbol of revolution. In 1918, the Republican political party called Sinn Féin wins a majority of Irish seats in British Parliament. The Gaelic phrase, Sinn Féin, translates to ourselves alone. It wasn't long until these elected officials declared themselves the Parliament of an independent Republic of Ireland.
Ireland was partially successful based on a guerrilla warfare in the early 20th century that provided 26 counties. Northern Ireland was divided or partitioned away from the rest of Ireland in 1922 and remained part of the United Kingdom. The British were very good at taking census, so they knew those 6 counties were overwhelmingly Protestant in the 1920s and could form a statelet or a governing set of institutions that would be loyal to the crown and have a strong majority.
To end the Irish uprising, the Brits agreed to let most of Ireland and its Catholics go, but they wanted to keep 6 counties of the Ulster province, which were primarily occupied by Protestant Unionists who were loyal to the Crown.
Northern Ireland itself was a gerrymander. The borders were designed to give the Ulster Unionists exactly what they wanted.
I have one more professor to introduce you to.
I'm Michael Laffin. I'm now retired, but for well over 30 years I lectured in history in University College Dublin. Every year I talked about the Irish Revolution. By and large I concentrated on the early 20th century.
I interviewed Professor Laffin at a cafe in Dublin, so pardon the background noise.
I've written quite a bit about it. I've written an enormous book, over 500 pages, that took me many, many, many years to write. So there are my credentials.
Are you good with those credentials?
Yeah, good enough for me.
Now, the British, as we know, have ratcheted and fled from very many parts of the world. Southern Ireland, of course, first of all in 1921-22, we began the process.
That revolution and its parliament were supported by the Irish Republican Army, which evolved into what's become the modern IRA. The original IRA fought a war against the British, who would be weakened and weary from the First World War.
Initially, the British government offered the Unionists all 9 counties of the province of Ulster. And the Unionists said, no, thank you very much, far too kind. We want only 6, please, only 6. They were a majority in 4. If they had all 9 of the traditional province that went back centuries, if they had all 9 counties, the balance of population would be 55 to 45%. And with a higher Catholic birth rate, who knows, within 10, 20 years, the Catholics would outvote the Protestants. They couldn't have that. So let us have an area, the largest possible area that we can control.
With a Protestant Unionist majority in their chosen portion of the Ulster province, the Brits were able to maintain control of Northern Ireland, and they signed a treaty with the Republic in order to do so. The treaty would involve the British accepting the Republic of Ireland as independent. But this sparked a major schism when it came to Irish Republicans, many of whom felt it would be a betrayal to accept anything less than full control of the island. In 1921 and 1922, pro- and anti-treaty Republicans fought a civil war over the partitioning of Northern Ireland. It led to lasting bitterness in the communities all over the country, and it taught the British that the best way to fight Ireland was to get Ireland to fight itself. That infighting has become a way of life, and it's an ongoing challenge for Dave to navigate the different factions. He has to understand them, stay in their good graces, and not alienate any of his potential sources of information. While the 26 southern counties formed the Republic of Ireland, life in the north did not improve for many Irish Catholics.
Of course, we all know that from the 1920s to the 1960s, Northern Catholics, Northern Nationalists were discriminated against. They were not quite an oppressed people, but certainly they were an underclass. They suffered. And now the Northern Catholics, the Nationalists, were better educated than before, thanks to the welfare state of the 1940s and 50s. They had a greater self-confidence and they demanded full equality. This was blocked by the Unionists, determined to make no concessions. And even though there was, by the end of the 60s, the key figure in his overthrow was an outsider, not a member of the Ulster Unionist Party, but a rogue, radical, Protestant extremist, Ian Paisley. To my mind, the most malign and malevolent figure in 20th century Irish history. A man who spread hatred and resentment and loathing and fear for very many decades.
To the terrorists operating from the Irish Republic. And yet Mrs. Thatcher tells us that Republic must have some say in our province. We say never, never, never.
That's the kind of rhetoric Ian Paisley was known for. Paisley has been compared to former Alabama Governor George Wallace, an ardent segregationist who once ran for president in 1968.
I draw the line in the dust and toss the gauntlet before the feet of tyranny, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Sound familiar? Catholics in Northern Ireland even modeled their own peaceful campaign for rights after the Black civil rights movement in the U.S. at the time.
It was only in the 1960s that began to be challenged, partly as a result of the example from the United States. Martin Luther King, the freedom marches in Mississippi, Alabama, and elsewhere. The freedom marches turned into demonstrations and turned into attacks on the Catholic minority by Protestants, in many cases supported by the Protestant police force. In 1969, whole streets in Belfast were burned out as Catholics were driven away. In August 1969, the British Prime Minister, Edward Heath, decided to abolish the Northern Irish Parliament and government and impose direct rule. This was done to the fury of the Unionists and the delight of Catholics. And some people felt, and sadly they were totally wrong, some people felt that this is it.
It looked to Northern Ireland's Catholics or nationalists briefly like their lot might be getting better.
The discriminatory element has gone. The Catholics will now be treated fairly. There's no need for any more violence. It has served its purpose. The IRA disagreed. They didn't want a more just, a more fair, a more balanced Northern Ireland. They wanted no Northern Ireland whatever. They wanted to get rid of it, to overturn its two-thirds majority, the Protestant Unionist majority that favoured it, to conquer the Unionists and impose a united Ireland on the Unionists, and also impose a united Ireland on the Republic of Ireland.
This time between the 1920s and 1960s laid the foundations of what would become known as the Troubles, which is an extremely understated name given to the decades of guerrilla conflict between the Irish and the British or British loyalists. Again, Professor Tim White.
The result of that was ultimately the British Army arrives in 1969 to police the streets of Northern Ireland. That's a disaster because the British Army doesn't understand the local contours of Northern Ireland, all the different neighborhoods, which groups were whom. It was very hard for the average British soldier to identify who was a peaceful Catholic teenager just going about his business versus somebody who might be intent upon trying to attack or kill a British soldier. So the result was ultimately the British commit a heinous crime of Bloody Sunday in which they kill many innocent civilians, 13 innocent civilians who were peacefully marching. And that ended the civil rights movement and escalated what came to be known as the Troubles, violent retributions and attacks by Protestant paramilitaries, Catholic paramilitaries, and the British Army.
This is known as Bloody Sunday.
And in the course of the next few years, two terrorist groups emerged, one on each side. The Provisional IRA on the Catholic National side, the Ulster Volunteer Force on the Protestant Unionist side. Though most of the killing, most of the destruction was carried out by the IRA. Northern Ireland, between the years 1969 and 72, spiraled downwards. In 1971, the Unionist government, subordinate government of course, in Belfast, introduced internment and arrested large numbers of people, every single one of whom was Catholic. It was clear discrimination of the old sort that was associated with the bad old days before the relative liberalisation of the 1960s. The result, an explosion of violence. Hundreds of people killed in a single year.
The new iteration of the IRA, the Provisional IRA, reprises the violent tactics that led to successful revolution for the 26 counties of the Republic almost 50 years earlier. These violent skirmishes quickly become a guerrilla war fought on the streets of Northern Ireland.
America's role has been one of pretty consistent support at the level of Irish America for Irish nationalists, and sadly in many cases for the IRA, that group of sectarian murderers. The American government has taken a rather different view. It wants good relations with Britain. And it was only when Bill Clinton became president that he began to tilt the balance away from America's support for Britain to a more even-handed approach.
This is the backdrop for the Republicans who frequent Dave's new bar, the Drowes Inn. Dave has to brush up on his history, and quickly, because this is the conflict Dave has landed in the middle of. And without understanding the nuances of the struggle, Dave doesn't have a shot in the dark at finding his way into the militant circles. Dave learns immediately that owning an Irish pub might be even more difficult than spying. But it becomes a struggle for him and Maureen to get out of the bar with even a cent left. When Dave Rupert leased and took over the Drowes Inn, he inherited an authentic Irish pub to run his operation, but he also inherited its flaws. The Drowes Inn had a caravan park out back. For Americans, think RV park. It's a place to rent spots and camp for a holiday.
There was a caravan park behind it, and it was like low-end caravan. It was like an IRA theme park. Now they were out on Gannon mostly,
The caravan park out back hosted a mostly pro-IRA crowd of vacationers from the north. They came in part to attend a memorial for IRA soldiers in the nearby town of Bundoran, hosted every year by Dave's IRA friend, Joe O'Neill.
These bastards were awful about paying their. I mean, it was 300 pounds, and she would practically hang out the drive. She got most of the rent.
Yeah.
And one of the guys, we sent him a letter. We did everything. He didn't pay his rent. So we finally towed his caravan out of the spot and re-rented it. Hey, this fucker sues us.
The Drowes Inn had a lot of issues. Firstly, the vacationers didn't always pay for their spots. Secondly, the previous manager of the inn hadn't paid his bills. Worst of all, that included the bill to the Guinness vendor.
He'd run up a bunch of bills at all the vendors, like I couldn't buy beer. I was buying beer out of the back door, place down the Sligo.
So right from the start, Dave can't go through distributors to buy his Guinness and has to smuggle it in. Author of The Accidental Spy, Sean O'Driscoll.
You simply can't have a bar in rural Ireland without Guinness. He got a hookup with a smuggler who was smuggling it down from Northern Ireland. So the Guinness barrels all had Northern Ireland imprints on them, and that kept him going for a while.
Dave's pub is in the Republic, so he's buying Guinness kegs that have been smuggled across the border from the north. He needs the Guinness, but he can't return the kegs to get refilled, or he would get busted. So he complains to his pal Joe O'Neill about all these empty kegs.
Because they were untraceable barrels, Joe O'Neill, who had a pub a mile up the road, saw them as the perfect casing for bombs, and then came to David and said, will you start putting away some of those untraceable barrels for bombs?
Now, Joe O'Neill would never actually say the word bomb.
He would always make a motion with his hands of an explosion. So David said he did, but then he would write down the serial numbers of each case of Guinness and then pass it on to the FBI.
It's even illegal to carry kegs around in your car over there, empty kegs, which I didn't know as I was toting carloads of empty kegs because I was buying beer in Sligo. I was taking down a carload of empty kegs. But I had a whole bunch of kegs there that they'd smuggled the beer out of the north, and of course there was no way to take them away. And so Joe wanted some of them, so I slipped out there and took down all the serial numbers of it.
There's no evidence that we know of these kegs were ever used to make bombs. But this is what Dave was looking for. He was supposed to be tracking anything that might lead to violence. And here he is handing Guinness kegs over to his pal Joe O'Neill, apparently to make bombs. As a spy, Dave is finally on the right track. He just needs to keep the Drowes Inn full of paying customers.
And we had patio, we had, like,
It was turned when they
yeah,
were
about 50, 60 time when the lounge would be,
party.
but mostly it was just in the front. There would be anywhere from 2 or 3 people to 10, 15 people. The lounge was separate. It was in the back, and, it would really be a special, even be a special occasion.
Dave and Maureen also learned that Thursday night was what the Irish would call dole night, when their unemployed regulars from the north got their welfare checks to spend.
We had Thursday, Friday, Saturday. We had Thursday night. So our pub would be empty Friday and Saturday.
Yeah.
200 hours, they had music night. They would go with the music for us.
Remember how we said there was something magical about being in the Harp and Thistle back in Florida when the Irish music was in full swing? Dave and Maureen said they would alternate music nights with the other pubs in the area, and the crowd would only turn up when the Drowes Inn had music. And they made sure the music played to the Republican crowd.
They would have been Republican Saturday.
It would have been typically Irish songs too, not.
Well, but I want to tell you that most Irish songs are Republican songs. I mean, even the national anthem is a Republican song. I mean, like drinking songs like Joe McDonald, the Ballad of Joe McDonald. You dare to call me a terrorist.
Always big at Joe would sing them, or great, and they would get the crowd going.
But we were a Republican pub. We were known as a Republican pub.
Dave and Maureen did everything they could to get people to drink at the Drowes Inn, but his pub is running into the ground.
On a Friday night or Saturday night, you really only had maybe 5 people there.
Because they were doing the music down the street.
We'd have people
go down the street.
We'd have people all day long.
But the crowds they did get some nights couldn't make up for the times it was dead. So despite finally getting a leg to stand on with his spy work, Dave and Maureen are running out of money. Buckley and the FBI are preoccupied with the bombing at the '96 Olympics, and the Garda isn't offering Dave any money.
How soon after you opened the pub was it that you went to this meeting with Dermot in the bread? Probably a month later, 2 or 3 weeks later.
After we were in the pub, right?
Yeah, we went over there on the same night that the jet went down in the bay in New York. Oh, okay. Because my sisters, the last thing I told them was something about we're going to Ireland, but we're not going by the regular route. And so the jet goes down, and there was an 800 number to call, and they called. There was somebody with the last name of Rickford on the plane. Well, the first name wasn't right, and we didn't call for a couple of weeks. And of course, my family didn't know her family, and she talked to her father. And so a couple of weeks later, I called, said, "How you doing?" And they were just dying.
Dave's sisters thought he died when TWA Flight 800 crashed into the Atlantic Ocean near Long Island. But Dave wasn't on that flight.
They had no clue how to get a hold of us. This was before the cell phones. I didn't have cell phones over there. After the pub, I used to go up at 2 o'clock in the morning and use a phone and a booth on the side of the road down Flagler Road to call her, to get a hold of her.
It's a reminder of the technology in Dave's spying days. He initially didn't have a cell phone and often relied on midnight trips to payphones to keep in touch with family back home in the U.S. while he's running this rural pub. In the end, Dave won over a lot of his regulars. After months of watching Dave and Maureen switch out kegs, hose down the sidewalk, or emerge from bathrooms with mops, locals recognized them as Americans with a few extra bucks indulging their hobby as pub owners, not as spies.
Most of the deal was for just to, if you see this guy, me and her in there scrubbing the floors and doing the stuff that we did, who the fuck would think that they were, what they were really up to? Yeah. When they'd see us mopping the floors and cleaning the yard.
While Dave's time undercover at the Drowes Inn earned him the trust of many Republicans, it also ran him out of money. After months of struggling to keep the bar afloat and no help from any government agencies, Dave and Maureen pack it in and head home to the States.
There was a lot of red paint over the field. All around.
A few years later, the Drowes Inn would mysteriously burn down overnight. Dave would later relay a story saying, quote, "A couple of guys at Joe O'Neill's bar jokingly asked to smell my hands for gasoline, as it had been rumored that the boys in the balaclavas had struck. Dave and Maureen are broke. The FBI can't get him any money. The Garda can't get him any money. Dave told us he and Maureen had to borrow money from Maureen's father to get an apartment back in the U.S. But Dave's had a taste of really being embedded as a spy, and he's ready for more.
We had a meeting with the FBI office and we met with Buck Graham, general counsel. He was over there with us and he's a very, very nice fellow. But as an internal, he said to me, if it's not in writing, don't expect to get it. And so over the time since then, anytime they brought this up, well, you need to trust us on that. I think that's the law. Let me quote your own attorney. And I'm sure there is probably now a section of the FBI training. Do not ever say that.
That's next time on The Rebel Kind. If you liked this episode of The Rebel Kind, you could do us a favor by leaving a positive review on whatever hosting service you're listening to us on.
The Rebel Kind is created and hosted by Bob Hergeth and Abden Palish. Executive producer, Anjay Nagpal. Written by Dalton Main, Abden Palish, and Bob Hergeth. Senior producer, Dalton Main.
Editing and sound design by Catherine Anderson. Original music by Dale Eisinger. Mixing by Gerard Bauer. Show art by Rebecca Hendon.
Our show was recorded in the podcast studio at Roosevelt University. Our development producers were Danielle Elliott and Jen Swan.
Marketing support from Tessa Cairns-Clay. Production legal by Bruns, Brennan, and Barry. Legal clearance fair use by Rachel Strom at Davis Wright Tremaine.
From Entropy Media, the Underbelly series was created by Anjay Nagpal. Executive producer, Josh Fielstad. Executive producer, Gerard Bauer. Our head of operations is Nuna Ebo. Project manager is Sebastian Perry. Associate producer, Heidi Rudvoets. Development and production support, Simona Kessler.
Special thanks to Flimnick Roberts for calling us in 20 years ago. This series is dedicated to the innocent victims of Northern Ireland's decades of violence.